Now, we've all probably heard of the gut-brain connection and this whole idea that our gut can actually act in a way as our second brain. And of course, the food that we eat, the things that we put in our gut, can have a major impact on our gut health, which in turn can have a major impact on our overall health. Now, functional mushrooms, perhaps surprisingly, perhaps not, have actually been studied for the benefits that they might have on our gut. And this research is really interesting. This is the paper I was looking at to put this together. It's in the Journal of Functional Foods, and it talks about the role of dietary edible mushrooms in the modulation of gut microbiota. So basically saying how certain dietary edible mushrooms can change the microbiota or the bacteria in our gut, which can have some pretty profound health benefits. And the mushrooms that they studied in this particular paper were reishi, lion's mane, maitake, and shiitake. Those are all super popular functional mushrooms. Some of those are also popular gourmet mushrooms. And the way that this can happen is actually two ways, right? First of all, number one, mushrooms contain polysaccharides that can act as prebiotics. So you might have heard about probiotics, right? So probiotics are certain beneficial bacteria that you can consume, and then consuming that bacteria changes the ratio of certain bacteria in your gut, which can have all sorts of health implications. But prebiotics are substances that make those changes. So prebiotics are something that you could eat, and it causes a change in the bacteria of your gut. Now, number two, compounds in mushrooms can actually act mechanically to help with the gut lining. So mushroom polysaccharides, again, these are the fiber and water-soluble compounds from the mushroom fruiting body, can actually help to mechanically seal certain things in the gut and the gut lining. And you might have heard of like leaky gut before. And I'm not an expert on this, but you can kind of imagine, right? If you have some sort of permeable barrier in your gut, and mushroom polysaccharides and mushroom fibers can kind of fill that gut lining and help to mechanically seal it, well, that can obviously help and have all sorts of functional benefits and help deal with leaky gut. Now, again, 4 different mushrooms were studied for this, and that was reishi, maitake, lion's mane, and shiitake. Now, the thing you got to remember when going through any of these mushroom studies really is to know that, number one, there's all sorts of different parts of the mushroom that can be used, and then also the way that mushroom is extracted or processed can also have a massive impact on the final product. So it's kind of hard to do these studies or paint any broad strokes because you don't know what part of the mushroom was used. You don't know what kind of extraction method was used. For example, if you're growing mycelium on grain, that's going to be a lot different than something that is like a fully extracted fruiting body. But the bottom line here is that functional mushrooms can definitely have an effect on our health. And this study is saying specifically functional mushrooms can have an impact on our gut health. So the first mushroom I wanted to talk about, and the first mushroom they talk about in this study, is reishi. Now, reishi is also known as the mushroom of immortality. The scientific name is Ganoderma lucidum. Some people have called it the mushroom of deathlessness. Right away, we're going to find out some people call it the mushroom of 100 diseases, which means it's just this thing that's been basically prescribed for so many different things. Here is just one chart that they had in this paper, and you can see all of these different compounds in reishi and the different effects that it might have. So GLP, that stands for Ganoderma lucidum polysaccharides. These are hot water extracted compounds from the fruiting body. They have antioxidant properties, immunomodulation properties, anti-inflammatory properties. And then down here, these are the triterpenes. Now, triterpenes, reishi's got lots of them. There's hundreds of them inside the reishi fruiting body. And these are alcohol soluble. So you're not going to find them in a hot water extract. You're going to find them in alcohol extracts of the fruiting body. But these are the ganoderic acids, which have all sorts of other potential benefits. One of these here is like inhibiting the release of histamine. And you think, well, yeah, that's probably why people use reishi mushroom to help with allergies. So the bottom line here from this graphic is a mushroom is more than just a mushroom. It's also all the compounds inside of it and all the things that it can possibly do. But specifically for gut health, in this study, it talks about 2 things. First of all, it talks about the polysaccharides. So again, those are the water-soluble compounds in reishi mushroom. And those polysaccharides being able to change the composition of the bacteria in the gut. Specifically for reishi, It talks about reversing this thing called the bacteroides firmicutes ratio, and I probably am not pronouncing that right, but the thing that's important there is this ratio of bacteria has been associated with things, in mice anyways, associated with things like pancreatitis and a high-fat diet. So certain poor health states in the gut have been reversed through using the polysaccharides in reishi mushroom. So the same thing with the triterpenes, actually. So this study, see if I can find it here, the effect of G. lucidum triterpenes on gut microbiota. The study shows that the alcohol extracts of reishi fruiting body decrease the abundance of bacteria associated with a high-fat diet. So again, the way I interpret this is reishi triterpenes and reishi polysaccharides being able to bring our gut bacteria back into balance, which is super important for overall health. So in reishi, both the polysaccharides and the triterpenes have potential gut health benefits, both acting mechanically, but also acting as a prebiotic, right? Changing those bacterial ratios. Another popular mushroom, lion's mane, and you can see it right here, Hericium erinaceus, was included in this study. And lion's mane is typically thought of as kind of the brain boosting mushroom. It's kind of thought of as a nootropic, and a lot of people wouldn't really consider it as something that might help with the gut. But that's exactly what was shown in this study, was that both the polysaccharides, and not triterpenes, because there's not triterpenes in lion's mane, but the polysaccharides and these fungal immunomodulatory proteins have been studied for the way that they can change the different ratios of our gut microbiota. And I do have a bit of a theory on this. Again, I haven't looked into the research on it. I don't know if there's research that has been done, but maybe, just maybe, something to think about, that the benefits that lion's mane is having on our brain, maybe part of that is the benefit that it's having on our gut, and going back to that whole gut-brain connection, because you really can't separate those two. If in order to have a healthy brain, you need to have a healthy gut, and kind of vice versa. So the fact that lion's mane can have benefits on the gut, and the fact that people use lion's mane as a brain boosting mushroom or as a nootropic, I think there's something interesting there that I definitely kind of want to look into. So what is the headline here? Well, without repeating myself too many times, basically the headline is that functional mushrooms contain compounds such as polysaccharides, triterpenes, fungal immunomodulatory proteins that can change the composition of our gut bacteria, and in turn could have potentially massive impacts on our overall health. And of course, this has been shown in the research, but I've also heard from tons of people that have had benefits to their gut from using functional mushrooms. So there's definitely something to it. Overall, it's a fascinating topic, not just functional mushrooms and what they're doing to our guts, but the gut-brain connection in general. And actually, I was just on a panel in Miami talking about this very topic, functional mushrooms and the gut-brain axis. And also on that panel was Dr. Jonathan Fields. He is a doctor of functional medicine. So we wanted to bring him onto the Mushroom Show and get a deeper understanding about what's going on with mushrooms and our guts. Let's roll the interview.
My name is Dr. Jonathan M. Fields. I am an acupuncturist and functional medicine doctor and a primary care provider in the state of Florida.
Awesome. And I got the chance to speak with you on a panel in Miami at the Microdose Conference about functional mushrooms and the gut-brain axis, which is really cool. You talked about a lot of cool different stuff while we were down there, but I did want to dig in a little bit on that topic. So maybe you could just briefly explain to us like what the gut-brain axis even is.
Sure. So it's a big area of growing research in the last 5 to 10 years. So within the Eastern medicine traditions, we've known about this for a couple thousand plus years. But functional medicine has really shifted this way in the last few years. I guess one of the easiest ways to describe it is, I'll give you one example, is serotonin, right? Everybody thinks of serotonin as one of these brain hormones, and that's affecting our mental health. Most people don't know that about 90% or more of the serotonin is actually produced in your small intestine, right? Not in the brain. So it's very difficult to have good mental health if your gut health is off, right? If you have a poor diet, or if you have IBS, or maybe some other gut issues, Crohn's, colitis, any sort of acid reflux, that may be affecting your mental health. So that's just a brief overview.
And I guess a follow-up to that question, and you kind of already answered it, but maybe just we can do it again. Like, why is gut health so important overall?
It's another fascinating field. And as we've doing more research on this the last few years, we're seeing now that gut health is actually important for every single aspect of your health. It is not separate from your mental health. It is not separate from your heart health. It is not separate from your immune system. A lot of your immune system is coming from gut health as well. So it is probably, you can easily say, the most important type of health.
You've heard this idea that like the gut can act as your second brain. Do you think there's a lot of validity to that?
So yes, that's part of this whole system. They call it the enteric nervous system, right? It's like another nervous system. They've recently found out there's probably just as many neurons and neural connections from your gut to your brain than anywhere else. And that's part of the gut-brain axis, because it will affect your mood. It will affect depression, anxiety, all this kind of stuff. It comes from the gut, right? As well as the immune, like we just talked about. It's very difficult to be mentally stable if your gut health is out of whack, right? And there's many different reasons why it might be out of whack.
Now, let's bring it back to mushrooms for a second here. How is it that mushrooms, or specifically functional mushrooms, are interacting with the gut?
It's a great question, and there's still a lot of research being done. There's a lot of it that we still don't know. My background is an herbalist from the Eastern medicine traditions. This stuff has been written about for 2,000 plus years. So, and we talked a little bit about this on the panel that we were on together. There's numerous reasons. So one of the reasons that might be causing mental health issues, specifically from the Eastern medicine traditional route, could be an overabundance of phlegm or edema in the body, or fluids building up in places where they don't belong, right? Because that can literally cloud your sinuses, cloud your judgment, make you feel foggy headed. And we also look at it like it's blocking the clear yang qi, or the energy from flowing from the body to the brain. So one of the ways that the mushrooms help, besides the neural connections and other things that we know with lion's mane, is actually most of the mushrooms are diuretics. So they help drain extra edema from the body. And they also help dry up phlegm and mucus in the body. So that's just one particular method. I think there's some research on the lion's mane and some of these other mushrooms, healing ulcers. So that's another method. There's many different pathomechanisms, and it's very different from the Eastern tradition, because we're dealing more with the energy and the flavor of the herbs and your body type and your constitution, which is very different from how we work in the Western herbalist sense, or how we're working with the functional medicines, where it's basically like, you have this symptom, you get this mushroom, or you have this symptom, you get this vitamin or this drug. We look at it completely differently. We're looking at it like, do you have a deficiency in your digestive system? Are we trying to tonify your digestive system? Or do you have an excess in your digestive system? Is it hyper or hypo? Do you have an overabundance of phlegm and mucus? Do you have an overabundance of food retention? Are you not breaking down the food, right? Do you have not enough stomach acid or too much stomach acid? And then we look at the flavors and the tastes and the herbs that can kind of work together synergistically. So mushrooms are a big part of the Asian diet, always have been, right? It's just part of the things that they cook with. Many different types of mushrooms, they're delicacies. I think we're just starting to catch on to that here in the West.
One thing I wanted to ask you quick, and this could be totally conjecture, but it's something I've been thinking a lot. Do you think it's possible that some of the brain health benefits that people experience through something like lion's mane are actually happening in the gut and not necessarily directly a mechanism with the brain?
It's definitely possible. The mechanisms of actions on a lot of these things are largely unknown. A lot of times, personally, from my experience and from the Eastern tradition, we don't need to know. We just need to know that it works. The scientific method is literally you repeat the experiment over and over and over, and if you get the same results, it works. That is the definition of scientific method. So for these days to be like, oh, this isn't scientific, or we don't have the research to prove it, it doesn't really make sense. Because, yes, we might not have double-blind, randomized, controlled clinical trials on every single mechanism of action. We might not have been able to isolate every single molecule, but we have 2,000 years worth of research and data, and we have all these new clinical trials that work. So definitely, and you know what? They're not mutually exclusive. So I don't think you can have one or the other. You're not going to have the mental health or clarity of mind or less brain fog, better memory if your gut health is out of whack. even if you look at Alzheimer's now, which we know lion's mane and some of these other mushrooms have been shown to be effective and to some extent more effective than some of the medications that are out there, right? They're calling Alzheimer's now type 3 diabetes because even though some of the patients might not have diabetes, they found similar areas within the brain and in the gut and issues with insulin production as people who have diabetes. So that's just another interesting theory or method where it kind of ties together.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, there's so much that we don't know, but what we do know is, we can lean on the history of use, and these things really have stood the test of time. Right. That being said, like in your practice or what you've seen, what mushrooms, which species of mushrooms in particular have shown to be the most beneficial, you think, for gut health?
So for gut health specifically, one of the ones that we don't use, and was in my presentation, we don't use so much on the functional mushroom side, but from the Eastern medicine side, it is probably the number one is Poria. Now, the reason we're probably not using a lot of it in the functional side is because there are some contraindications, right? Poria it's one of the most widely used herbs in the Eastern medicine tradition as well, but it is specifically for drying and draining too much edema. So you might have gut health issues, but if you're the type of person who your stomach or your body type is more on the dry side, let's say you have dry hair, dry eyes, dry skin, dry mouth, maybe you have a little bit of anemia, so you're a little bit of a blood deficiency, so you're just not getting the body fluids that your body needs to nourish, and you start taking these drying type of mushrooms, that's actually contraindicated. You might do more harm than good. But for anybody who's on the wet side or the excess side like that, Poria is fantastic. That is the most popular one that we use. And it usually will be used synergistically. We usually pair it with other herbs. Very rarely from the Eastern tradition do we use one single herb like we do. Reishi is one of those exceptions. Reishi is one of those exceptions where you actually can use it in therapeutic dosages on its own. And that Reishi is one of the nicknames we have for it in the Eastern tradition is the herb of 100 diseases because there are so many health benefits to it. So that's one of the things that you can specifically use for gut health. Also can help with ulcers. Also helps draining phlegm and mucus out of the body. But at the same time, it tonifies. So it won't over dry you out.
Now, you're not just mixing up herbs. You're also mixing up oil paints and acrylics. You are an artist, and I got the chance to see some of your art down when I was in Miami. So can you talk a little bit about your art? I had one of your paintings here, but Teague cleaned my office and I can't find it right this second. But I'd love to talk about your art a little bit and maybe show some examples.
Yeah, I'd appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah, so I've been painting and drawing probably since I could hold a crayon. And it's kind of one of these things that I've done professionally in the past. And so I was very fortunate to be one of the speakers at Wonderland. And then when I found out they had an art component, I was like, please me. It's personally fulfilling. I think it's just one of the best methods of self-expression that you could possibly have is to start with something that is completely blank, like a white canvas, and just make something out of nothing, right? And you're doing the same thing with, extractions and formulations and even the show to some extent. So I think you guys can understand that as a creator.
That's awesome. Well, Dr. Jonathan Fields, thank you so much for your time today, and thanks for joining us here on The Mushroom Show.
I really appreciate you guys. I'm looking forward to seeing the product. I love what you're doing, and I'm happy to support it and share all this. And I'll send you some photos of the art.